Thank you so much for joining me today. It is always wonderful to see you all here. So, today we are beginning the stories involving the Banshee and the Dullahan. Our first segment is simply going over the Banshee and the Dullahan. The Banshee, formed from the words ban, meaning a woman, and she, Sidi, meaning fairy, is an attendant fairy that follows the old families and none but them, and wails before a death. Many has seen her as she goes wailing and clapping her hands. Well, that was certainly interesting. Let me see if I can fix that. It is raining a little bit right now, so perhaps that might cause issues with me streaming today. There we go. Alright, so let us try this again. The Banshee, formed from ban, meaning woman, and she, Sidi, meaning fairy, is an attendant fairy that follows the old family and none but them, and wails before a death. Many have seen her as she goes wailing and clapping her hands. A keen, a funeral cry of the peasantry, is said to be an imitation of her cry. When more than one banshee is present, they wail and sing in chorus. It is the death of some holy or great, an omen that sometimes accompanies the banshee is a coach a bower, an immense black coach mounted by a coffin and drawn by headless horses driven by a Dullahan. Thank you, Alicia Cart, for following. I hope you enjoy your stay here. It will go rumbling to your door, and if you open it, according to Croker, a basin of blood will be thrown at your face. These headless phantoms are found elsewhere than in Ireland. In 1807, two of the sentries stationed outside St. James Park died of fright. A headless woman, the upper part of her body naked, used to pass at midnight and scale the railing. After a time, the sentries were no longer stationed at the haunted spot. In Norway, the heads of corpses were cut off to make their ghosts feeble. Thus came into existence the Dullahan. Perhaps, unless indeed, they are descended from the Irish giant that swam across the channel with his head in his teeth. How would he carry in his teeth? Our first little story today is called How Thomas Connolly Met the Banshee, attributed to J. Oddhunter. Ah, the Banshee, sir. Well, sir, as I was striving to tell you, I was going home from work one day, from Mr. Cassidy's, that I would tell you of. In the dusk of the evening, I had more nor a mile, it was nearer 2 miles, to track to where I was lodging with a decent, witty woman I knew, Biddy McGuire, be name, so as to be near my work. It was the first week in November, and a loathsome road I had to travel, and dark enough, with 3 trees above it, and about halfway there was a bit of a bridge I had to cross. Over one of them, This is written in an accented way, so taking me a moment to properly interpret what the narrator is trying to say. Over one of them, little streams that run into the Dodder. I walked on in the middle of the road, for there was no path at that time, Mr. Harry, nor for many a long day after that. But, as I was saying, I walked along till I came nigh upon the bridge, where the road was a bit open, and there, right enough, I see the hog's back of the old-fashioned bridge that used to be there till it was pulled down, and a white mist streaming up out of the water all around it. Well now, Mr. Harry, often as I passed by the place before, that night it seemed strange to me, and like a place you might have seen in a dream, and as I came up to it, I began to feel a cold wind blowing through the hollow of my heart. Musha Thomas, says I to myself. Is it yourself that's in it? Says I. Or if it is, what's the matter with you at all? Says I. So I put a bold face on it, and I made a struggle to set one leg before the other until I came to the rise of the bridge. And there, God be good to us. In the candle of the wall, see an old woman, as I thought, sitting on her hungers, all crouched together, and her head bowed down, seemingly in the greatest affliction. Well, sir, I pitied the old creature, and thought I wasn't worth a tranine for a mortal fright I was in, and up and says to her, "That's a cold lodging for you, ma'am." Well, a sort of ha'porth she says to that, nor took no more notice of me than if I hadn't let a word out of me, but kept rocking herself to and fro, as if her heart was breaking. So I said to her again, "Ma'am, is there anything the matter with ye?" And I made for to touch her on the shoulder, only something stopped me, for as I looked closer at her, I saw she was no more of an old woman, nor she was an old cat. The first thing I took notice to, Mr. Harry, was her hair. It was streaming down over her shoulders, and a good yard on the ground on each side of her. Oh, to be the hokey farmer, that was the hair. The likes of it I've never seen on mortal woman, young or old, before nor since. It grew as strong out of her as out of her a young slip of a girl you could see. But the color of it was a mystery to describe. The first squint I got of it, I thought it was silvery gray, like an old crone's. But when I got up beside her, I saw, by the glance of the sky, it was a sort of an chariot color, and the shine out of it like floss silk. It ran over her shoulders, and the two shapely arms she was leaning her head on were all the world like Mary Magdalene's in a picture. And then I perceived that the grey cloak and the green gown underneath it was made of no earthly material I had ever laid my eyes upon. Now, I needn't tell you, sir, that I saw all of this in the twinkle of a bedpost, long as I made to make the narration of it. So I made a step back from her, and the Lord be between us and harm, says I out loud. And with that I blessed myself. Well, Mr. Harry, the word wasn't out of my mouth before she turned her face upon me. Oh, Mr. Harry, but that was the awfulest apparition ever I seen. The face of her as she looked up at me. God forgive me for saying it. but 'twas more like the face of the Sea Homo, the and in Marlborough Street Chapel, nor like any face I could mention, as pale as a corpse, and a most of freckles on it, like the freckles on a turkey egg, and the two eyes sewn in wide red thread, from the terrible power of crying they had to do, in such a pair of eyes as the were, Mr. Harry, as blue as two forget-me-nots, and as cold as the moon in the bog-hole of the frosty night, and a dead and alive look in him that could send a cold shoulder through the marrow of my bones. Be the mortal, you could have rum, a teacupful of cold aspiration out of the hair of my head that minute, though you could. Well, I thought the life would leave me entirely when she rose up from her hungers, till, bedad, she looked mostly as tall as Nelson's pillar, and with the two eyes gazing back at me, and her two arms stretched out before her, and a keen out of her that rose the hair on my scalp till it was as stiff as a hog's bristles. In a new hearth broom, away she glides round the angle of the bridge, and down with her into the stream that ran underneath it. 'Twas then I began to suspect what she was. Wisha, Thomas, says I to myself, says I, and I made a great struggle to get my two legs into a trot, in spite of the spazzing of fright the pair of them were in. And how I brought myself home that same night, the Lord in heaven only knows, for I never could tell, but I must have tumbled against the door and shot in head foremost into the middle of the flure, where I lay in a dead swoon for mostly an hour. And the first I knew was Miss Maguire standing over me with a jar of punch she was pouring down my throat to bring back the life into me, and my head in a pool of cold water she dashed over me in her first fright. "Ara, Mr. Connolly," said she, "what ails ye, shed cheese, to put the scare on a lone woman like that?" said she. "Am I in this world or the next?" says I. "Musha, where else would ye be, only here in my kitchen?" said she. "Oh, glory be to God," says I, "but I thought I was in purgatory at the least, not to mention an uglier place, says I. Only it's too cold I find myself, and not too hot, says I. Fakes, and maybe you wore more no. Dark ways there, only for me, said she. But what's come to you at all? Did your fetch ye seen, Mr. Connolly? Nah, don't mind it, says I. Never mind what I seen, says I. So, by degrees I began to come to a little, and that's the way I met the banshee, Mr. Harry. But how did you know it really was a banshee after all, Thomas? Because, sir, I knew the apparition of her well enough. It was confirmed by circumstance that occurred at the same time. There was a Mr. O'Nail's was come on a visit, you must know, to a place in the neighborhood. One of the old O'Neills of the country Tyrone, a real old Irish family, and the banshee was heard keening round the house that same night. By more than one then was in it, and sure enough, Mr. Harry, he was found dead in his bed the next morning. So if it wasn't the banshee I'd seen at the time, I'd like to know what else it could have been. Our next story is called The Banshee of the O'Briens, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. Lady Fanshawe, whose husband was ambassador at the Spanish court in the reigns of Charles I and II, has left an account of an individual spirit of this class, which has seen and heard by herself. Being on a visit at the house of Lady Honora O'Brien, and having one night retired to rest, she was awakened about 1 o'clock by a noise outside one of the windows. She arose, withdrew the curtains, and beheld, by the light of the moon, a female figure leaning in through the open casement. She was of a ghastly complexion and long red hair, and was enveloped in a white gown. She uttered a couple of words in a loud, strange tone, and then, with a sigh, resembling the rushing of wind, she disappeared. Her substance seemed to be the consistence of dense air, and so awful was the effect produced on the lady that she fainted outright. Next day she related to the lady of the house what she had seen, and the news was received with no marks of surprise. My cousin, says she, whose ancestors owned this house, died at 2 o'clock this morning, and, as In the case with the rest of the family, the banshee was heard wailing every night during his illness. The individual spirit who utters the keen for his branch of the O'Briens is supposed to be the ghost of a woman who was seduced and murdered in the garden of this very house by an ancestor of the gentleman who died this morning. He flung her body into the river under the window. So the voice and appearance of this wailer causes more than terror to those of other spirits, with whose grief there is no blending of revenge. So, it is actually raining where I am, my dears, and I think it is causing issues with me trying to stream. It actually cut out on me earlier, and I'm having a lot of issues, it seems. So I'm thinking that I may have to cut it here simply because I'm having some problems. Well, at least I was able to read a few stories for you today. But so long as the storm is going, I think I may have to hold off. Maybe. Oh, hello, Armored Horns. Did you just come in? If you did, I can try to continue for you if you want. You did. I think the storm might be letting up a little bit. I can try to continue reading. I just hope that it's not coming across as choppy to y'all. That is my only concern. And of course, I don't want y'all to hear the storm in the background. Right now it sounds fine? Okay. Then I'll continue. Please let me know if there's starting to be issues. Alright. So our next story today is The Bunsworth Banshee, attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. The Reverend Charles Bunworth was rector of Buttevant in the county of Cork about the middle of the last century. He was a man of unaffected piety and of sound leaning, pure in heart and benevolent in intention. By the rich he was respected, and by the poor beloved. nor did a difference of creed prevent him looking up to the minister. So was Mr. Bunworth called by them. In matters of difficulty and in seasons of distress, confident in receiving from him the advice and assistance that a father would afford to his children. He was the friend and the benefactor of the surrounding country. To him, from the neighboring town of Newmarket, came both Coran and Yelverton for advice and instruction. Previous to their entrance at Dublin College, young, indigent, and inexperienced, these afterwards eminent men received from him, in addition to the advice they sought, pecuniary aid, and the brilliant career which was theirs justified the discrimination of the giver. But what extent the fame of Mr. Bunworth, far beyond the limits of the parishes adjacent to his own, was the performance on the Irish harp, and his hospitable reception and entertainment of the poor harpers who travelled from house to house in the country. Grateful to their patron, these itinerant minstrels sang his praises to the tingling accompaniment of their harps, invoking in return of his bounty abundant blessings on his white head, and celebrating in their rude verses the blossoming charms of his daughters, Elizabeth and Mary. It was all these poor fellows could do. Who can doubt their gratitude was sincere, when at the time of Mr. Bunworth's death, no less than 15 harps were deposited on the loft of his granary, bequeathed to him by the last members of a race which now has ceased to exist. Trifling, no doubt, in intrinsic value were these relics, yet there is something in gifts of the heart that merits preservation, and it is to be regretted that, when he died, these harps were broken up onto one after the other, and used as firewood by an ignorant follower of the family, who, on their removal to court for a temporary change of scene, was left in charge of the house. You know, I would love to learn to play the harp one day. It is something that I have thought about for a long time. It would be very nice to learn how to play it. The circumstances attending the death of Mr. Bunworth may be doubted by some, but there are still living, credible witnesses who declare their authenticity, and who can be produced to attest most, if not all, of the following particulars. About a week previous to his dissolution, and early in the evening, noise was heard at the hall door, resembling the shearing of sheep. At that time, no particular attention was paid to it. It was nearly 11 o'clock the same night when Kavanagh the herdsman, turned from Mallow, whither he had been seen in the afternoon for some medicine, and was observed by Miss Bunsworth, to whom he delivered the parcel, to be much agitated. At this time, it must be observed, her father was by no means considered in danger. "What is the matter, Savannah?" asked Miss Bunsworth, but the poor fellow, with a bewildered look, only uttered, "The master, miss, the master. He is going from us." And, overcome with real grief, he burst into a flood of tears. Miss Bunsworth, who was a woman of strong nerve, inquired if anything he had learned in Marrow induced him to suppose that her father was worse. "No, miss," said Cavanna, "it was not in Mallow." "Cavanna," said Miss Bunsworth, with that stateliness of manner for which she is said to have been remarkable, "I fear you have been drinking, which I must say I did not expect at such a time as the present, when it was your duty to have kept yourself sober. I thought you might have been trusted. What should we have done if you had broken the medicine bottle, or lost it? For the doctor said it was of the greatest consequence that your master should take it tonight. But I shall speak to you in the morning, when you are in a fitter state to understand what I say." Vanna looked up with a stupidity of aspect which did not serve to remove the impression of his being drunk. As his eyes appeared heavy and dull after the flood of tears, but his voice was not that of an intoxicated person. "Miss," said he, "as I hope to receive mercy herefore, neither bit nor sup has passed my lips since I left this house, but the master—" "Speak softly," said Miss Bunsworth. "He sleeps, and is going on as well as we could expect." "Praise be to God for that, anyway," replied Cavanna. "But oh, miss, he is going from us surely. We will lose him, the master. We will lose him. We will lose him." And he wrung his hands together. "What is it you mean, Cavanna?" asked Miss Bunsworth. "Does it mean," said Cavanna, "that a banshee has come for him, miss, and 'tis not I alone who have heard her?" "'Tis an idle superstition," said Miss Bunsworth. "Maybe so," replied Cavanna, as if the words idle superstition only sounded upon his ear without reaching his mind. "Maybe so," he continued, "but as I came through the glen of Ballybeg, she was along with me, keening and screeching and clapping her hands by my side every step of the way, with her long white hair falling all about her shoulders, and I could hear her repeat the master's name every now and then, as plain as I ever heard it. When I came to the old abbey, she parted from me there and turned into the pigeon field next to the barren ground, and folding her cloak about her, down she sat under the tree that was struck by the lightning, and began keening so bitterly that it went through one's heart to hear it. "Savannah," said Miss Bunsworth, who had, however, listened attentively to this remarkable relation, "my father is, I believe, better, and I hope will himself soon be up and able to convince you that all this is but your own fancy. Nevertheless, I charge you not to mention what you have told me, for there is no occasion to frighten your fellow servants with this story." Mr. Bunsworth gradually declined, but nothing particular occurred until the night previous to his death. That night both of his daughters, exhausted from continued attendance and watching, were prevailed upon to seek some repose, and an elderly lady, a near relative and friend of the family, remained by the bedside of the father. The old gentleman then lay in the parlor, where he had been in the morning, removed at his own request, fancying the change would afford him relief, and the head of his bed was placed close to the window. In a room adjoining sat some male friends, and as usual on the like occasion of illness, in the kitchen many of the followers of the family had assembled. The night was serene in moonlight. The sick man slept, and nothing broke the stillness of their melancholy watch. When the little party in the room adjoining the parlor, the door of which stood open, was suddenly roused by a sound at the window near the bed. A rose tree grew outside the window, so close as to touch the glass. This was forced aside with some noise, and a low moaning was heard, accompanied by clapping of hands, as if of a female in deep affliction. It seemed as if the sound proceeded from a person holding her mouth close to the window. The lady who sat by the bedside of Mr. Bunsworth went into the adjoining room, and in a tone of alarm inquired the gentlemen there if they had heard the banshee. Skeptical of the supernatural appearance, two of them rose hastily and went out to discover the cause of these sounds, which they all had distinctly heard. They walked all round the house, examining every spot of the ground, particularly near the window from whence the voice had proceeded. The bed of earth underneath it, in which the rose tree was planted, had been recently dug, and the print of a footstep, if the tree had been forced aside by mortal hand, would have inevitably remained. But they could perceive no such impression, and an unbroken stillness reigned without. Hoping to dispel the mystery, they continued their search anxiously along the road, from the straightness of which and the lightness of the night they were enabled to see some distance around them. All was silent and deserted, and they returned surprised and disappointed. How much more then were they astonished to learn that the whole time of their absence those who remained within the house heard the moaning and the clapping of hands, even louder and more distinct than before when they had gone out. And no sooner was the door of the room closed on them than they heard again the same mournful sounds. Every succeeding hour the sick man became worse, and as the first glimpse of morning appeared, Mr. Bunsworth expired. So, our final story for today is actually more of a poem titled A Lamentation. And I am debating on whether this would be better sung than dramatically read. This lamentation was for the death of Sir Maurice Fitzgerald, Knight of Kerry, who was killed in Flanders of 1642. This has been translated from the Irish by Clarence Mangan. There once lifted up one voice of woe, one lament of more than mortal grief. Through the wide south to and fro, for a fallen chief. In the dead of night that cry thrilled through me. I looked out upon the midnight air. My own soul was all as gloomy as I knelt in prayer. O'er Lochmuir that night, once, twice, yea thrice, passed a wail of anguish for the brave that had curled into ice its moon-mirroring wave. Then uprose a many-toned wild hymn in chorale swell from Ogra's dark ravine, and Mogili's phantom woman mourned the Geraldine. Far on Caramana's emerald plains, shrieks and sighs were blended many hours, and from Moy in fitful strains answered from her towers, Yogal, Inamiki, Imogili, mourned in concert, and their piercing keen woke wandering life the silly lens of Inchiqueen. From Lomo to yellow Dunmore there was a fear the traders of Tralee gathered up their golden shore and prepared to flee. For in ship and hall the night till morning showed the first faint beamings of the sun. All the foreigners heard the warning of the dreaded one. This, they spoke, portended death to us, if we fly not swiftly from our fate. Self-conceited ignorance, thus ravingly to prate. Not for base-born higgling Saxon truxers, rings laments like those by shore and sea. Not for churls with souls like hucksters, waileth our banshee. For the high Milesian race alone ever flows the music of her woe. For slain heir to bygone throne, or the chief laid low. Hark, again methinks I hear her weeping. Yonder, is she near me now as then? Or was but the night wind sweeping down the hollow glen? And that, my darlings, will be the final story for today. I apologize that it broke up at the very beginning of the stream. Thankfully, it seems as though as if it has been relatively stable during this storm. But, well, I can't be too upset with it, as I truly do love the rain. But, for now, I'm afraid this must be adieu. So, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And I thank you so very much for joining me today. I hope my glimmer brings you back to me. And next week we shall continue our stories involving the Banshee and eventually the Dullahan. But until then, be safe, my dears, and be mindful of what Mother Nature will be throwing to you. For we are only as healthy as she allows us to be. But until next time, my dears, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your days. And may the sound of my voice be something that may be used to soothe and ease any of your pains. Until next time, my darling denizens of the forest. Ta-ta, and good night. Oh, you didn't cause me to do more. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't feel comfortable doing it. Good night. Thank you so much for watching till the end of the video. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, please feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and if you wish, leave a comment down below. On each side of me there should be other videos from my channel that you may or may not wish to look at. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining me.